This is Anna Bevan Gravely. I'm with NC-FREE, North Carolina Free Enterprise Foundation. Thank you so much for joining us. And you're running in the 11th district, correct?
That's correct.
Awesome. Tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, I was born, raised, and educated here in North Carolina, originally from Shelby in Cleveland County. Went to Appalachian State University undergraduate, North Carolina Central University Law School, and then left here to serve in the Air Force, thinking I was going to do 4 years and come home, and ended up staying for 25 years and retired as a colonel. Worked for Congress for a year. I was a senior specialist in national security for the 111th Congress and head of the Foreign Affairs, Defense and Trade Division, the Congressional Research Service. Was a law professor at Howard University for 4 years. And most recently, I was a judge at the U.S. Department of Labor. And moved back home to North Carolina to Asheville last May. And my wife and I are living here and building a house, and loving being back home in the Tar Heel State.
Yeah. Just out of curiosity, what made you want to run for office now?
Well, I certainly wasn't my plan. I retired from the military back in 2008. I retired from being a judge at the Department of Labor last September, and I thought I was retired because I was in that part of the state that had been gerrymandered into the 10th district, where they split Asheville and put half in the 11th, half in the 10th. And even though you don't have to live in a district or run there, to me it didn't seem right to live one place and run somewhere else. So I had no thoughts of running until November, when the state courts told the legislature, either you're going to fix these lines or we're going to do it for you. And it became apparent that Buncombe County and Asheville would be reconnected, because you really couldn't explain what had happened to Asheville other than trying to rig the outcome. And at that point, I looked at the folks that were running. Mark Meadows at that point was still running on the Republican. Right. We thought he was. And I think I looked at it and I figured I had 30 plus years serving the country, either in uniform or in a suit working on the Hill or in a robe on the bench. And I just felt like I had too much invested in the country and in democracy to sit back and watch it continue on the path that it was on. So I figured, if not me, who?
Yeah.
And jumped in. I didn't know if we could do it. And we only had 15 weeks from then until the primary, and other folks have been running a lot longer. But we ended up, winning the Democratic primary, and still waiting to hear who the Republican challenger is going to be. But really excited.
And we're going to have to wait a little longer with
right. Yeah, because of the coronavirus is changed life fundamentally for in a number of respects. But one is it's pushed back the runoff on the Republican side. I believe. I think June 23rd is now their runoff date, because trying to figure out how to hold an election in 17 counties when folks are, asked to, stay at home and avoid crowds makes it a little difficult. So hopefully they'll get to have it on June 23rd.
Yeah, it definitely does, for sure. Which I think that takes us right into our first official question. The first one was just curiosity on my part. But the first official question is, have you ever owned a business or been in a management position within a business? If so, please describe the position within the business.
Yeah, I think the last time I actually ran a business was a long, long time ago. When I was in college at Appalachian State, I was a bail bondsman. Back then, I guess I'm giving away my age, but back then, Watauga County, where Appalachian State was located, was a dry county, so you couldn't buy alcohol there. So the college kids would go to Blowing Rock, and coming back on a Friday, Saturday night after midnight, fair percentage of the cars coming from Blowing Rock towards Boone had someone behind the wheel that shouldn't have been there. And when college kids would get arrested at 2 a.m, they usually didn't have the bail money in their pocket to get out of jail, so I became a bail bondsman. So that was the only time I actually had to manage profit and loss for myself. And then, like I said, I joined the Air Force in 1983, right out of law school. So I've spent most of my adult life either in the military or in an academic setting or in the federal government. I did, in a number of settings, managed multi-million-dollar budgets in the Air Force. But as far as actually running a private for-profit business, I haven't done that in quite a while.
Yeah, well, that managing budgets, I think, is very important when in understanding profit and loss and the way the businesses work
Right.
and function. So I think that's a great addition. Second question, would you say the current level of federal and state taxation on business is too high, too low, or just about right?
Well, I think again, we're referring, I think, specifically to North Carolina. I think overall in North Carolina, it's about, I think, if I'm not mistaken, we have the lowest state corporate tax in the country at, I believe, 2.5%. And then at the federal level, I believe it's 21%. So I think that it's, everybody can quibble whether it should be a little higher or a little lower, but I think overall it's about right. Again, the coronavirus has thrown complications into the economy that no one could have anticipated. And it'll be interesting to see how the economy recovers when this eventually passes. But it seemed like going into, before we got into this, at least on the corporate side, that the tax structure was balanced about right from my perspective.
And third question, do you feel it is appropriate for state or local government to offer incentives to private businesses in consideration of locating, expanding, or conducting business in a specific location within the state?
Yeah, that's really a double-edged sword, to be quite honest with you, because I believe in trying to attract business to areas where economic development is lacking. Here in the 11th district, we have 17 counties. There are 2 counties of the 17 that are actually below the national average in poverty. There's one, Buncombe County, where I'm located, that was on par with the rest of the nation. But the other counties in this district, the poverty level was significantly above the national average. So I believe in incentives to draw business to areas where people are hurting economically. But I've also seen the practical effects of that. I have an uncle that was served on a county commission here in North Carolina for a number of years, where textiles, when I was growing up, textiles and cotton farming were the big industries. And now, the county I'm from, I don't think there's a stalk of cotton or a textile mill. And trying to recruit industry, it became almost, I hate to call it a bribe, but who could offer the biggest package to draw in industry? And industry would, if you offered the best deal, they would come, and whenever their commitment was up, they would look for the best deal somewhere else. So as I said, it's a mixed bag. I hate to see where it becomes that kind of a market to where the business is going to locate there for whatever the minimum period of time is, and then they're going to shop around for the best deal they can get somewhere else. Because I've seen it happen in my home county where it disrupts lives, where people, they get employed, they're excited about it, they're enthusiastic about industry coming in. And then when they pull up the stakes and they leave and go somewhere else, it devastates the community. So I'd like to see a level playing field where companies compete on a level basis. So I guess I haven't given you a clear, definitive.
No, I think, the topic it's a very difficult issue. There are a lot of, there are multiple sides. There's more than just 2 sides to this issue in particular, because we usually say there's 2 sides.
Let's look at someone here in Nashville that has a really innovative business building a very energy efficient product, and they manufacture here in Buncombe County, but they're opening another facility in another state. And I asked, I said, boy, why didn't you build another facility here in this district? And the incentives I was offered elsewhere were just too attractive to pass up. So, from a business perspective, I understand going where you can get the best deal and maximize your profit. But for the local area, it sure would have been nice to have kept that manufacturing community here.
Yeah. No, thank you. That's a great example. And describe your personal opinion as to what the key principles of free enterprise and our economic system are. If elected, how will you work to uphold those principles?
I think clearly, the key principles are, the opportunity to make a profit, the protection of private property rights, the ability, for competition and a level playing field. And again, as I said, if I'm, get the privilege of representing this area, we have a real problem with poverty. And it's a multifaceted problem. It's not just attracting, we talked earlier about subsidies to attract industry. I think to attract industry and business as well, we've got to focus on education, because employers want an educated, trained pool of workers to man their operations. Educationally, here in Western North Carolina, our schools, our kids right now rank in the bottom third of the country in math and reading skills. So we need to focus on education. We need to focus on healthcare. Again, every county in this district, the uninsured rate is substantially above the national average. We have many counties where 1 in 5 don't have healthcare coverage. We have, with the coronavirus going on, I was looking in our 17 counties, we have 8 where there's not a single ICU bed. And we've had a number of small communities that have lost hospitals that, again, if I'm an employer and I'm looking to move to Western North Carolina and open a business, I want to bring my family here too. And if the schools are not up to par, if healthcare is lacking, then I'd be tempted to look elsewhere. So I think we need to address those as well. And I think, again, we talked about incentives. I think the areas here that are high in poverty, one of the things I'm really pleased, North Carolina ranks 2nd in the country in solar energy production. So I'd like to focus on, I think we got to be the epicenter for alternative energy, because that is the future, I think. In Western North Carolina, I think ought to be the hub for that. My wife and we're currently building a house, and hope in a couple of weeks to be moving in, and we're doing solar because it's economically affordable with the federal tax credit and the Duke Power rebate. It makes it economical to do it. And the panels that we are on our house were made in America, but they're not made here in North Carolina. So I would love to see us make this the epicenter for the East Coast for alternative energy, because those are good jobs. I mean, they're good for the environment, they're good for employment, they're also good for national security, because if we're totally energy independent, then we don't have troops sitting guarding pipelines in other countries if we can make our own power here. So I think we can tie all those things together, and in a free market, in a competitive environment, and North Carolina, I think, could really prosper by leaning into the future of alternative energy.
Yeah, interesting. Great. I mean, very interesting answer. I really enjoyed that. And this one is sort of pretty timely, actually, with dealing with COVID and how we're seeing the daily press conferences from both the governor as well as the president. But in your opinion, what is the appropriate balance in the scope of federal and state regulatory requirements on business? What, in your opinion, is the best way to balance the appropriate protections without impugning business or economic vitality?
This is really, the virus has kind of brought things.
It has, yeah.
One of those things you kind of take for granted when things are functioning fairly smoothly. I mean, in a crisis is when your structure is really tested on whether it's capable of handling whatever the threat is. I mean, I don't think anyone, I know I certainly couldn't have imagined the state that we're in right now with just, like shutting down. Here in Buncombe County, we've got the, everybody stay at home, only essential businesses operating. And we're a very heavily dependent on tourism here. And with people not traveling, the hotel parking lots are empty, the restaurants are closed, and it's really had a significant impact. So with respect to regulation, I spent 4.5 years as a judge at the Department of Labor as an administrative law judge. So interpreting and applying administrative regulations was, what I was doing for a living. Every regulation, there's a an origin on why the regulation was, they're not just like arbitrarily created. They're there in response to address an issue. And I know from my experience as a judge, where I did hearings involving compliance with Department of Labor regulations,
Mm-hmm.
that in some cases it was they were overly, the good purpose had been overridden by being overzealous. I mean, sometimes there are unintended consequences of a well-intended
Mm-hmm.
regulation. I know an example that I'm familiar with here in Buncombe County is there was a regulation, or actually it was a law that was passed a number of years ago. There was a woman went to a hospital. She was in labor. She had no insurance coverage. So the hospital was transporting her to a public hospital, and she died en route. There was a law that was passed that if someone is admitted to a hospital and they're in distress, they can't be transferred out or released until until they're stable. Which sounds like it makes eminent sense. You can understand why you would have a regulation that would have that purpose of making sure people aren't kicked out on the street when they're in distress in a hospital. A lot of the folks that they go to the emergency room go there because of mental health issues or alcohol-related issues or drug-related issues. So there's a treatment facility here. But if someone is taken to the emergency room and they're experiencing, for instance, a drug episode, they can't be transferred to a rehabilitation facility. While you can't be transferred out while you're in a emergency condition, and you can't be released until you're stable. And once you're stable, you can't be forced to go to another facility. So the well-intended purpose of having the regulation that required not releasing someone until they were stable has a bad impact when people that need to be not treated in an emergency room but in a rehabilitative facility can't be taken there because of the law. So it's a fine line on balancing protecting the purpose that the regulation was intended for without being overly burdensome. And that was certainly my role in 4.5 years as a judge, was trying to make sure that balance was fairly struck, that didn't adversely impact business unnecessarily. And my experience too was folks in business did their best to, I don't think I ever saw a case where anyone deliberately tried to run afoul of the regulations. It was often through, you had to dot the I's and cross the T's. It was usually inadvertent when somebody didn't. And in that case, often the bureaucracy would try to be overly strict in their interpretation of the regulation and how it should be applied. So I think it's got to be fair. The regulation's got to be enforced to take care of the purpose it was intended for, but not to stifle business and employment and profitability.
All right. And last question, before we get a chance to hear more about where we can learn more about you, is, so if you're elected, what are going to be your top priorities as it pertains to the business community?
Well, I think, again, it goes back to fixing those kind of core things that I think business depend on. And that's education, making sure that our kids here get a good education, and there are opportunities for, when I was growing up, I think it was considered if you didn't go to college and get a 4-year degree that you weren't going to be successful. And I think that, again, I'm a big advocate of education, but I think there's also tremendous opportunities for folks that don't want to go to a 4-year college to get technical training. As I said, we're building a house, and I know our builder is saying that he can't find enough certified plumbers and electricians and those skilled trades, jobs that would pay $75,000, $80,000 a year that don't require a college degree.
Yeah,
it does require technical training. So I'm a big believer in education. I view education as an investment, not as an expense, because our future depends on educating young folks so that they can be productive and have a better future. So education, healthcare, so that employers, folks can get the healthcare that they need, but also employers look at this area and don't, that doesn't go in the negative column, that healthcare is lacking here. And in Western North Carolina. So, and again, I talked about, green technology, I think being the future, and North Carolina being a leader in that area, particularly Western North Carolina. So I would focus on those. And then finally, and the coronavirus has really brought this home as well, is broadband access. Over 90% of Americans have access to high-speed broadband. We have a number of counties here in this district where it's 50% or less. So I've met people that live here in the local area. One comes to mind in particular. I met a couple that, during the primary, that they'd lived in one of the western counties, and they moved here because the wife has a medical condition that requires constant monitoring. So she wears a device. It has to be connected 24/7 for monitoring. In the western counties, they could not get reliable, dependable access. So they relocated here for that purpose. So medically, it was necessary. But also for the school kids. A lot of kids now with the coronavirus are staying at home. In the urban areas, a lot of those are doing online education. And so the counties that we have out here where 50% of the population doesn't have access to broadband, those kids don't have that opportunity. As I said too, this is also an area that's where tourism is a big industry. And we have folks that come here from Atlanta and from Charlotte and from other metropolitan areas to enjoy the beauty of the mountains. And when they come here, they expect to be connected. So if you own a cabin out in one of the rural counties and you don't have broadband access, they're going to go somewhere else, to spend their money. So that's what I'm going to focus on, is healthcare, education, poverty, addressing poverty, and expanding broadband access. And I think all of those would be good for business.
Well, thank you so much, Colonel Moe Davis. Where can we learn more about you, and stay tuned?
The website for the campaign is Moe Davis for Congress, so MOEDAVIS Congress.com, or follow me on Twitter. It's COL Morris, MORRIS DAVIS, or on Facebook as well at Moe Davis for Congress. So we're really excited. Hey, and thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
No, thank you for participating and wanting to talk to NC-FREE's community.
Thank you.